The sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon as Nora Sullivan pressed herself against the rocky outcrop, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had been traveling with a small group of settlers heading west through Oklahoma Territory in the summer of 1878, searching for a new life after losing her family farm back in Missouri. Now, as bullets whizzed overhead and men shouted in the distance, she wondered if this journey would be her last. The attack had come without warning. One moment, the small wagon train had been winding through the dusty trails outside Tulsa, and the next, a gang of outlaws had descended upon them like locusts. Most of the men in their party had been killed in the initial assault, and Nora had fled into the rocks, clutching nothing but her medical bag. Her father had been a physician, and she had learned his trade well before consumption took him 2 winters past. That leather bag, worn and heavy, was all she had managed to grab when the chaos erupted. The shooting eventually stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt even more threatening. Nora waited, barely breathing, as the sun beat down mercilessly on the Oklahoma landscape. The temperature had to be near 90 degrees, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath her cotton dress. She remained hidden until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. When she finally dared to move, her legs had gone numb from crouching. She made her way carefully back toward where the wagons had been, dreading what she might find. The scene was worse than she had imagined. Bodies lay scattered across the dusty ground, and the wagons had been ransacked, their contents strewn about like forgotten toys. Vultures already circled overhead, their shadows dancing across the carnage below. Nora fought back tears as she recognized faces of people she had traveled with for weeks. Mrs. Henderson, who had shared her cornbread recipe. Young Tommy Barnes, barely 16, who had dreamed of becoming a rancher. She whispered prayers for each of them as she searched for survivors, though hope grew dimmer with each body she passed. Then she heard it. A low groan coming from behind an overturned wagon. She rushed toward the sound, her medical training overriding her fear. A man lay pinned partially beneath the wagon's edge, his dark hair matted with blood and dust. His shirt was soaked red on the left side, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Despite the dirt and blood covering his face, she could tell he was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years. Nora knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of storm clouds. They focused on her with difficulty, glazed with pain. "Run," he managed to croak out. "Not safe." "The outlaws are gone," she assured him, already examining his wounds with practiced efficiency. "I am a healer. Let me help you." She could see he had been shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in his side. Blood loss had left him weak, but his pulse, though thready, was steady enough. The wagon had likely saved his life by providing cover after he fell. She worked quickly, knowing that sunset would bring dangers of its own to this exposed place. "This is going to hurt," she warned him before pressing clean cloth from her bag against the wound in his side. He groaned but did not cry out, his jaw clenching so hard she feared he might crack his teeth. As she worked to stop the bleeding, she studied his face more carefully. Strong features, weathered by sun and wind, with a few days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. He wore typical cowboy attire, denim pants and a cotton shirt, now ruined with a leather vest. A silver badge lay half-hidden beneath his vest, catching the dying light. "You are a lawman," she observed, carefully cleaning the wound. "Deputy Marshal," he gasped out between ragged breaths. "Xavier Nolan was tracking the gang that did this." "Well, Deputy Marshal Nolan, You are very fortunate that bullet missed anything vital, though you have lost quite a bit of blood." She pulled supplies from her bag, grateful for her father's insistence that she always keep it well stocked. "I need to remove the bullets and stitch you up, but I cannot do it here. Can you ride?" He attempted to laugh, but it turned into a cough that made him grimace. "Not likely." Nora surveyed their surroundings. The sun was nearly gone now, and she could hear coyotes beginning their evening song in the distance. They needed shelter, and they needed it fast. She spotted one of the wagons that appeared mostly intact, its canvas cover still attached. "I am going to get you into that wagon," she declared, standing and brushing dust from her skirts. "It is not much, but it will keep the elements off us." "You should leave me," Xavier said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Save yourself. More dangerous out here than you know." "I did not watch everyone I know die today just to abandon the one person I can actually save," Nora replied firmly. "Now, this is going to hurt considerably, but I need you to help me as much as you can." It took nearly 30 minutes of agonizing effort, but she managed to half drag, half carry the wounded deputy to the wagon. He was tall and solidly built, probably close to 6 feet, and over 180 pounds of muscle. By the time she had him situated inside the wagon bed, both of them were drenched in sweat, and Xavier had passed out from the pain, which Nora considered a mercy. She worked by lamplight, carefully extracting the bullets with tools her father had taught her to use with precision. The shoulder wound was clean, the bullet having passed through mostly muscle. The side wound was trickier, the bullet lodged near his ribs but thankfully having missed his lung and other vital organs. Her hands remained steady as she worked, just as her father had trained her, though inside her heart raced with fear and adrenaline. After stitching both wounds and bandaging them with clean linen, she finally allowed herself to rest. She had found some water barrels that had not been stolen or destroyed, and she used the precious liquid sparingly to clean her hands and offer Xavier small sips when he briefly regained consciousness. The night was long and filled with the sounds of the wilderness. Nora dozed fitfully, her hand resting on the small pistol she had found among the debris. Every sound made her jump, but morning finally came without incident. Xavier woke with a fever as she had expected. Infection was the real enemy now. Nora spent the day bathing him with cool water, forcing willow bark tea between his lips to help with the fever and pain, and changing his bandages. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words she could not understand, other times staring at her with those gray eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "Why are you doing this?" he asked during one of his more lucid moments on the second day. Nora was spooning broth into his mouth, made from supplies she had scavenged and a fire she had built a safe distance from the wagon. "Because you need help. You do not even know me. I know you are a lawman who was trying to protect people from those outlaws. I know you are hurt and need care." "That is enough." She offered him another spoonful, which he accepted. "Besides, I cannot leave now. You would die, and I would have wasted some perfectly good stitching." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been an attempt at a smile. "Practical. My father raised me to be sensible." She set the bowl aside and checked his bandages. The wounds looked better, less inflamed. "The fever is breaking, I think. That is a good sign. Your father taught you medicine. He was a physician, the best in our county back in Missouri. He wanted a son to follow in his footsteps, but he got me instead. Made the best of it, I suppose." "He taught you well," Xavier said, his eyes closing again. "I would be dead without you." By the third day, Xavier was strong enough to sit up for short periods, though the effort exhausted him. Nora had been working on a plan. They could not stay here indefinitely, exposed and vulnerable. She had found 2 horses that had not run far after the attack, both trained well enough to come when she called with handfuls of grain. If she could get Xavier onto a horse, they could make it to Tulsa. The town was not more than 15 miles away, according to what Xavier told her. "I will not make it 15 miles on horseback," Xavier protested when she outlined her plan. "You will because you must," Nora replied, using the no-nonsense tone her father had employed with difficult patients. "We have been fortunate so far, but our luck will not hold forever. We need to get to town where you can recover properly, and I can send word about what happened here." She spent that day preparing for the journey, fashioning a sort of sling she could use to help stabilize Xavier on the horse. She packed her medical bag and what supplies they could carry, including water and food. The rest would have to be left behind. They set out at dawn on the 4th day. Getting Xavier mounted was an ordeal that left him pale and sweating, but he gritted his teeth and endured. Nora rode close beside him, ready to catch him if he started to slip. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently to rest. The Oklahoma summer sun beat down without mercy, and Nora worried constantly about Xavier's wounds reopening. "Tell me about yourself," Xavier said during one of their rest stops. He was leaning against a tree, his face drawn with pain but his eyes alert. "Distract me from how much this hurts." Nora handed him the water canteen. "There is not much to tell. I am 22 years old, grew up in Missouri on a small farm. My mother died when I was 12 and my father raised me alone. He taught me medicine, taught me to read and write, taught me to think for myself, which scandalized the neighbors something fierce. Sounds like a good man. The best." She looked away, blinking back sudden tears. "He died 2 years ago. Consumption. I tried everything, but there was nothing to be done. After that, I lost the farm. Could not keep up with the payments on my own. I joined that wagon train hoping to start fresh somewhere new." "I am sorry," Xavier said softly. "What about you, Deputy Marshal Nolan? What is your story?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rolling Oklahoma landscape. "Not much to tell either. I am 26. Been working as a lawman for about 4 years now. Before that, I worked ranches wherever I could find work. No family to speak of. Parents died when I was young, and I have been on my own since I was about 15. That must have been difficult. It was what it was. I survived." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "Never really had a reason to do more than survive, I guess. Just drifted from one day to the next, one job to the next." There was something in his voice, a hollowness that made Nora's heart ache. She understood loneliness, but she had at least known love and family once. Xavier sounded like a man who had been alone for so long he had forgotten what it meant to be anything else. They continued their slow journey, and by afternoon, Nora could see buildings in the distance. Tulsa was not a large town, but it was civilization, and relief flooded through her. They might actually make it. The townspeople who spotted them riding in looked alarmed at first, then concerned. Nora must have made quite a sight, dust-covered and exhausted, supporting a half-conscious lawman on the horse beside her. A small crowd gathered as they reached the main street. "Get the doctor," someone shouted. "I am a healer," Nora called back, "but I need somewhere to take him. He has been shot and needs rest and care." An older woman with kind eyes stepped forward. "Bring him to the boarding house. I have a room on the ground floor. Martha Reeves, I run the place." With help from several townsmen, they got Xavier inside and into a proper bed. Nora supervised the move carefully, making sure his wounds were not jostled too much. Once he was settled, she shooed everyone out except Martha. "I need hot water, clean linens, and if you have any laudanum or whiskey, that would help," Nora said, already unpacking her medical bag. Martha nodded briskly. "I will get everything you need, dear. You look about ready to collapse yourself." "I am fine." "You are not, but I can see you are stubborn. At least let me bring you some food." Over the next few days, Nora barely left Xavier's side. Martha provided everything she needed and did not ask many questions, for which Nora was grateful. The town marshal, a grizzled man named Tom Hickory, came by to hear what had happened. Nora recounted the attack as best she could, and he promised to send men out to bury the dead and investigate. Xavier's fever came and went, but gradually his body began to heal. Nora changed his bandages regularly, made sure he ate even when he did not want to, and talked to him during his waking hours to keep his spirits up. She told him stories about her father, about growing up in Missouri, about the dream she had once had of becoming a real doctor, though women were not allowed in medical schools. "That is not right," Xavier said one afternoon when she mentioned it. He was propped up on pillows, looking more alert than he had in days. "You have more skill than most doctors I have met." "Skill does not matter when you are a woman," Nora replied, wringing out a cloth to clean his wounds. "The world has certain ideas about what women should and should not do." "You do not seem like someone who cares much about what the world thinks." She smiled at that. "My father used to say I was too headstrong for my own good, but he also said that being headstrong was the only way to survive in this world if you wanted to be anything other than what people expected." "Smart man," Xavier said. He watched her work with an intensity that sometimes made her self-conscious. "You saved my life, you know. I would have died out there if not for you. You already thanked me, several times in fact. I do not think I can thank you enough." His hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the bedside table. "Nora, I need you to understand something. Before you found me, before all this, I was not really living. I was just existing, moving from one day to the next without purpose. But you gave me a reason to live." Nora felt her breath catch at the raw emotion in his voice. His gray eyes held hers, and she saw something there that made her heart skip. "Xavier, I know it is too soon to say things like this," he continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I know you probably think I am just grateful or confused because you helped me. But it is more than that. These past days, talking with you, getting to know you, I have felt more alive than I have in years. You are remarkable, Nora Sullivan, and I do not want to let you slip away once I am healed." Nora did not know what to say. She had been so focused on keeping him alive, on dealing with each crisis as it came, that she had not allowed herself to think about her own feelings. But now, looking into his eyes and feeling the warmth of his hand on hers, she could not deny that something had shifted between them. Somewhere between those desperate first hours and these quiet days of recovery, she had started to care for him as more than just a patient. "You need to focus on getting well," she finally said, but she did not pull her hand away. "We can talk about the rest later." "Is that a yes to later?" A hint of a smile played at his lips. "It is a maybe to later. Do not push your luck, Deputy Marshal." But she was smiling too, and they both knew something had changed. As Xavier grew stronger, he began spending time out of bed, first sitting in a chair by the window, then taking short walks around the boarding house with Nora's help. She could feel the muscles of his arm beneath her hand as she steadied him, could sense the determination in the set of his shoulders. He was a fighter, she realized. He had survived being orphaned young, had made something of himself despite having no one to help him. That strength drew her to him. Martha noticed, of course. The older woman had a knowing look in her eyes whenever she saw them together. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had arrived in Tulsa, she pulled Nora aside in the kitchen. "That young man is smitten with you," Martha said without preamble. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He is grateful, that is all." Oh, honey, I am old enough to recognize the difference between gratitude and something deeper. That boy looks at you like you hung the moon. Martha patted her hand. Question is, how do you feel about him? I do not know, Nora admitted. Everything has happened so fast. 2 weeks ago, I was traveling west with a wagon train. Now everyone I traveled with is dead, and I am caring for a man I barely know in a town I never planned to stop in. Life has a way of taking us places we never expected, Martha said wisely. But sometimes those unexpected places are exactly where we need to be. That night, unable to sleep, Nora sat in the boarding house parlor with a cup of tea. She had taken a room upstairs, and Xavier was on the ground floor, but she found herself restless. The past few weeks had been such a whirlwind that she had not had time to process everything that had happened. Now, in the quiet hours after midnight, it all came crashing down on her. She had watched people die. She had saved a man's life. She had found something in Xavier that called to a part of her she had thought was closed off after losing her father and her home. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Could not sleep either. Nora jumped, nearly spilling her tea. Xavier stood in the doorway, wearing the clean clothes the town had provided for him. He moved carefully, still healing but much steadier than he had been. You should be resting, she scolded, but without much heat. I have been resting for weeks. I am going mad lying in that bed. He crossed to sit in the chair opposite hers, moving with only a slight wince. Besides, I heard you come down here, wanted to make sure you were all right. I am fine, just thinking. About what happened, the attack, she nodded. Among other things. It feels strange, being the only survivor. I keep wondering why I lived when so many others died. Xavier leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I have asked myself that question more times than I can count. Why did I survive when my parents died? Why did I make it through fights that killed better men? I do not think there are easy answers, Nora, but I do think we honor those who died by living well, by making our survival mean something. Is that what you have been doing, making your survival mean something? He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, no, not until recently. I told you before that I was just existing. I took the job as a deputy marshal because I needed work, but I did not really care about it, did not really care about much of anything. When I was lying under that wagon, bleeding out, part of me thought it would be easier to just let go. What changed your mind? His eyes met hers in the lamplight. When you told me you were going to help me, when I heard the determination in your voice, something in me decided to fight. And then, as you took care of me, as I got to know you, I realized I wanted to keep fighting. I wanted to live. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. Xavier, you cannot put that on me. That is too much responsibility. I am not putting it on you. I am just telling you the truth. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. You showed me that life could be more than just surviving. You showed me what it means to truly care about someone, to connect with another person. Before you, I had shut myself off from all that. It was easier to be alone, to not risk getting hurt. But you, Nora Sullivan, you broke through all those walls I had built. I am scared, she whispered. I lost everyone I loved, my mother, my father, the people on that wagon train. I do not know if I can bear to love someone again and risk losing them. Xavier stood and gently pulled her to her feet, careful of his healing wounds. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I am scared too. I have never done this before, never let myself feel this way about anyone. But Nora, I would rather have whatever time we can have together than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. When he kissed her, it was gentle and tender, full of promise and hope. Nora felt something inside her that had been frozen since her father's death begin to thaw. She kissed him back, her hands resting on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, two survivors who had found something worth living for in each other. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness that Nora had not thought possible. As Xavier continued to heal, they spent their days together, walking through Tulsa, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his years drifting from town to town, about the loneliness that had been his constant companion. She told him about her dreams, about the medical knowledge she wanted to share, about her desire to make a difference in the world. Martha watched them with approval, and the townspeople began to accept Nora as one of their own. The town doctor, an elderly man named Samuel Foster, heard about her medical skills and asked her to assist him with patients. Nora threw herself into the work, grateful to be using her training again. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after they had arrived in Tulsa, Xavier took Nora for a walk along the Arkansas River that ran near the town. His wounds had healed well, leaving scars but no lasting damage thanks to her skilled care. He had been talking with Marshal Hickory about returning to his duties, but there was something he needed to do first. They stopped under a large cottonwood tree, its leaves rustling in the summer breeze. Xavier took both of her hands in his, and Nora noticed that he looked nervous, which was unusual for him. "I have been thinking a lot about the future," he began, "about what I want my life to look like. For so long I did not have a future, not really, just a string of todays with no real purpose." "Xavier, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I want a future, Nora, a real one, and I want that future to be with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's. It is the only thing I have from before my parents died. I have carried it with me all these years, never really knowing why, but I think I was keeping it for this moment for you." Nora felt her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Are you asking me to marry you? I know we have not known each other long. I know this is fast and probably crazy. But Nora, when I thought I was dying out there in that canyon, I had no regrets because I had nothing to regret, nothing I was leaving behind. Now, the thought of spending even one day without you is unbearable. So yes, I am asking you to marry me. I am asking you to build a life with me, here in Tulsa or wherever you want to go. I am asking you to take a chance on a broken-down cowboy who did not know what living meant until you showed him." Tears were streaming down Nora's face now, but she was smiling. "You are not broken down. You are the strongest man I know. And yes, Xavier Nolan, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world seemed to fade away until there was just the two of them under that cottonwood tree. Two lost souls who had found their way home to each other. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Tulsa's small church. Martha cried happy tears and insisted on hosting a reception at the boarding house. Dr. Foster gave Nora away, having become a father figure to her in the months since she had arrived. Marshal Hickory stood up as Xavier's best man, and half the town turned out to celebrate with them. Nora wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Xavier wore his best suit, looking handsome despite the nerves she could see in his eyes. When the preacher asked if he took Nora to be his wife, Xavier's voice was strong and clear. "I do. She saved my life, and now I want to spend the rest of it making her happy." And when it was Nora's turn, she looked into those gray eyes that had first looked at her with pain and now shone with love and said, "I do. He gave me a reason to hope again, and I want to spend the rest of my life building a future with him." They exchanged their vows, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the church erupted in applause. Xavier kissed her thoroughly, making several of the older ladies fan themselves, and Nora laughed against his lips, happier than she had been in years. The reception was lively, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Nora danced with her new husband, feeling his arms strong around her, marveling at how far they had both come from that desperate day in the canyon. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked as they swayed to the music. "About how strange life is. If those outlaws had not attacked, if you had not been there, if I had not had my medical bag, none of this would have happened." "Are you having regrets?" "Not even one," she said firmly. "I was just thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. I wish those people had not died. I wish you had not been hurt, but I cannot wish away what brought us together." "I feel the same way." He pulled her closer. "I promise you, Nora, I am going to spend every day making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. I know you will. And I promise to do the same for you." They bought a small house on the edge of Tulsa, nothing fancy but comfortable and theirs. Xavier continued his work as a deputy marshal, though he was more careful now, having something to come home to. Nora worked alongside Dr. Foster, and her reputation as a skilled healer spread throughout the territory. People came from miles around seeking her help, and she never turned anyone away. Their first year of marriage was filled with joy and challenges as they learned to build a life together. They had disagreements, as all couples do. Xavier worried constantly when Nora had to ride out to isolated farms to treat patients, and she worried just as much when his work took him away for days at a time tracking outlaws. But they always worked through it, their love growing stronger with each challenge they faced together. One evening in the spring of 1879, almost a year after they had met, Nora had news to share. She waited until after dinner, watching Xavier read through reports at their kitchen table. He looked up when she did not start clearing the dishes as she usually did. "Is something wrong?" he asked, immediately alert. "No, nothing is wrong. Actually, something is very right." She took a deep breath. "Xavier, I am pregnant." The look on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Shock, then joy, then wonder, all cycling through in a matter of seconds. He stood so quickly his chair nearly toppled over and crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Are you sure?" "I am a healer, remember. Yes, I am sure. We are going to have a baby probably in late October if my calculations are correct." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have a family, Nora. I never thought I would have any of this. You have it now. We have it now." She cupped his face in her hands. "We are going to build the family neither of us had, Xavier. We are going to fill this house with love and laughter." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and she felt the truth of her words settle into her bones. They were going to be all right. They were going to be more than all right. They were going to be happy. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, much to everyone's relief. Nora continued working with Dr. Foster until she was too far along to ride out to distant farms, though she still treated patients who came to their home. Xavier was attentive to the point of being overprotective, which made Nora laugh and occasionally roll her eyes, but she knew it came from love. Martha visited often, already knitting blankets for the baby. Marshal Hickory pretended to be gruff about the whole thing, but was spotted more than once looking at baby clothes in the general store. The whole town seemed invested in their happiness, and Nora realized she had found something she had been looking for without knowing it. A community, a place where she belonged. On a cool October evening, with autumn painting the Oklahoma landscape in golds and oranges, Nora's labor began. Xavier immediately went into a panic, despite having faced down dangerous outlaws without flinching. Nora had to talk him through his own breathing exercises while managing her contractions. "Go get Martha and Dr. Foster," she instructed him calmly during a break between pains. "Then you can come back and hold my hand and tell me everything is going to be fine, even though we both already know that. But what if something goes wrong? What if, Xavier?" She took his face in her hands. "Nothing is going to go wrong. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Now go get help, and then come back to me." He did as she asked, and soon their little house was full of activity. Martha took charge like a general directing troops, and Dr. Foster supervised with the calm confidence of someone who had delivered hundreds of babies. Xavier held Nora's hand through it all, whispering encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how much he loved her. Their son was born just after midnight, his strong cries filling the house with the sound of new life. Dr. Foster placed the baby in Nora's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature that she and Xavier had created. He had dark hair like his father and the promise of his gray eyes. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed, staring at his son with absolute wonder. "Nora, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Nora asked, too overwhelmed with love to care that tears were streaming down her face. Xavier thought for a moment, then said, "James, after my father, and Thomas for his middle name after yours. James Thomas Nolan." Nora tested the name and smiled. "I think it suits him." Xavier carefully took his son, cradling the tiny baby with surprising gentleness for such a strong man. He looked at Nora with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this." "You gave me everything, Nora." "We gave it to each other," she replied, watching her husband hold their son. "We saved each other." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a bright, active boy with his father's determination and his mother's curiosity. When he was 3, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Claire, who had her mother's dark blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. 2 years after that came another son, Robert, who seemed to be a perfect blend of both his parents. Their house, once quiet and empty, was now always filled with noise and laughter. Xavier proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children to ride and rope, telling them stories of the Old West that were slowly disappearing. Nora continued her medical practice, now with 3 eager assistants who loved to help her mix remedies and bandage scraped knees. As the children grew, Nora and Xavier would sometimes sit on their porch in the evenings after the little ones were in bed, watching the sun set over the Oklahoma plains. They would talk about everything and nothing, their hands intertwined, comfortable in the life they had built together. One such evening in the summer of 1889, 11 years after they had first met, Xavier turned to Nora with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about that day?" he asked. "When you found me in the canyon?" "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "Usually when I am particularly grateful for what we have. I think about it often. I think about how close I came to dying, how close I came to never having any of this." He gestured to their home, where their children slept safe and sound. "If you had not stopped, if you had not been brave enough to help a stranger, I would have died alone and forgotten. Instead, I have a wife I love more than life itself and 3 beautiful children who are my whole world." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "You told me once that I gave you a reason to live. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember. It was the truth then, and it is the truth now." "Well, I want you to know that you did the same for me. After I lost my father and my home, I thought I would never feel whole again. But you made me whole, Xavier. You and our children, you are everything I never knew I needed." He kissed the top of her head. "We have built a good life, have we not? The best life. Better than I ever imagined." As they sat there in the gathering darkness, neither of them spoke of the challenges they had faced over the years. There had been difficult times, of course. Xavier had been injured more than once in the line of duty, though never as seriously as that first time. Nora had lost patience despite her best efforts, including a young mother who reminded her painfully of herself. They had struggled financially during hard winters and worried about their children through illnesses and accidents. But through it all, they had each other, and that had been enough. The children grew and thrived. James showed an interest in law enforcement like his father, and would often accompany Xavier on safe patrols around town. Claire demonstrated a natural aptitude for healing and would spend hours with Nora learning about herbs and treatments. Robert, the youngest, seemed to have inherited both parents' best qualities, with a kind heart and a sharp mind. As Tulsa grew from a small frontier town into a proper city, Xavier and Nora grew with it. Xavier eventually became the town marshal when Tom Hickory retired, a position he held with honor and integrity. Nora opened a proper medical clinic with Dr. Foster, who had become like family to them. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1892, he left the clinic entirely to Nora, trusting that she would continue his legacy of caring for anyone who needed help regardless of their ability to pay. Martha remained a constant presence in their lives, becoming Grandma Martha to their children even though they shared no blood relation. She eventually moved into a room in their house when she became too old to manage the boarding house alone, and the children adored her stories and her seemingly endless supply of cookies. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1894, Xavier surprised Nora with a trip. He had arranged for Martha to watch the children for a weekend, and he took his wife back to the canyon where they had first met. It had changed over the years, as everything did. The scattered remnants of the wagons had long since been cleared away, and nature had reclaimed the land. But the place still held significance for them. They stood together where Xavier had lain wounded so long ago, and Nora marveled at how much had changed since that terrible day. "I wanted to bring you here," Xavier said, holding her hand, "because this is where my life really began. Everything before this moment was just prelude. This is where I met you, where you chose to save me even though you did not know me, even though it would have been easier to leave. This is where I found my reason to live." Nora looked up at him, at the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of smiling. He was older now, as was she, but to her, he was just as handsome as he had been that first day. "I have been thinking about something," she said. "About fate and chance and how our lives unfold. I used to believe that everything happened for a reason, but after my parents died, after that wagon train was attacked, I stopped believing that. How could there be a reason for so much pain? And now I think that maybe it is not about everything happening for a reason. Maybe it is about what we choose to do with what happens to us. Those outlaws attacked our wagon train, and that was senseless and evil. But I chose to help you instead of running away. You chose to fight to live instead of giving up. We chose each other, and all those choices led us to the life we have now." Xavier pulled her into his arms. "I like that better than fate. It means we built this ourselves." "We did," Nora agreed, "and I would choose you again every single time." They stayed there for a while, remembering and honoring the past before returning home to their future. That night, lying in their bed with Xavier's arms around her, Nora reflected on how far they had both come. Two broken people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful together. The years continued to pass. James grew into a fine young man and followed his father into law enforcement, becoming a deputy marshal at age 20. Claire, true to her early promise, studied medicine voraciously and eventually went east to a newly opened medical school that accepted women. It was hard to let her go, but Nora and Xavier were immensely proud of their daughter's determination to pursue her dreams. Robert showed a talent for business and eventually opened a general store in Tulsa, where his friendly nature made him popular with customers. He married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and they gave Nora and Xavier their first grandchildren, twin girls who wrapped their grandparents around their tiny fingers from the moment they were born. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes that would have been unimaginable back in 1878, Xavier and Nora found themselves entering the autumn of their lives together. They were both still healthy and active, though they moved a little slower than they once had. Xavier had retired from being marshal, passing the badge to a younger man, though he still consulted on difficult cases. Nora had turned over most of the day-to-day operations of the clinic to a young doctor she had trained, though she still saw patients several days a week. On a warm evening in the summer of 1899, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and friends from throughout Tulsa. Martha, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, made a toast that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. "I remember when these two showed up in Tulsa," she said, her voice still strong. "He was half dead and she was determined to save him. I thought to myself, now there is a woman with gumption, and I was right. They have built a beautiful life together, raised wonderful children, and shown all of us what it means to truly love someone. Here is to 25 more years." Everyone cheered and clinked their glasses together. Nora looked around at all the faces she loved, at the life she and Xavier had created, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Xavier and Nora sat together on their porch swing, just as they had done countless times before. The Oklahoma sky was full of stars, and a warm breeze carried the scent of prairie grass. 25 years, Xavier mused. Hard to believe it has been that long. And yet it feels like both forever and no time at all, Nora replied. You remember what I told you in the boarding house, those first few days when you were taking care of me. You told me a lot of things. Most of it was fever-induced rambling. He laughed. True. But I also told you that you gave me a reason to live. That has never stopped being true, Nora. Every single day for the past 25 years, you have given me a reason to wake up and be grateful. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, he could still make her cry with his words. You did the same for me. I was so lost when we met, Xavier. I thought I had nothing left to live for. But you showed me that there was still joy to be found, still love to be experienced. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. We saved each other, Xavier said softly, repeating the words she had said so long ago when their son was born. We did, Nora agreed, and I would not change a single moment of it. They sat there in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars, two people who had found everything they needed in each other. The new century brought new challenges and new joys. The world was changing rapidly, with automobiles and telephones and electricity transforming daily life. Tulsa was booming, growing from the small frontier town they had known into a proper city. Sometimes, Xavier and Nora felt like relics of an earlier time, but they adapted as best they could, fascinated by the changes even as they held tight to the values they had always cherished. Their children continued to make them proud. James married a woman named Sarah and had 4 children of his own. Claire returned from medical school and opened a practice in Tulsa, specializing in women's health. She never married, saying her work was her life, and Nora understood perfectly. Robert's general store thrived, and he and Elizabeth added 2 sons to their twin daughters. As grandparents, Xavier and Nora found a new kind of joy. They had time now to indulge the grandchildren in ways they had not always been able to indulge their own children. Their home was always full of young voices and laughter. Xavier taught the grandchildren to ride and told them stories of the Old West. Nora taught them about healing herbs and the importance of helping others. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1903 at the age of 86. Her funeral was one of the largest Tulsa had ever seen, with people coming from miles around to pay their respects. She had touched so many lives with her kindness and wisdom. Nora and Xavier mourned her deeply, but were grateful she had been part of their lives for so long. In the spring of 1908, Xavier and Nora celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 50s now, their hair more gray than dark, their faces lined with years of living. But when Xavier looked at Nora, he still saw the brave young woman who had refused to let him die. And when Nora looked at Xavier, she still saw the wounded cowboy whose eyes had held such depth of emotion even through his pain. They took a trip that spring, just the 2 of them, traveling by train to see the Grand Canyon. It was something they had always talked about doing but never had the time. Standing on the rim of that vast natural wonder, holding hands as they had for 3 decades, they marveled at the beauty of the world. "We have been blessed," Xavier said quietly. "More than I ever thought possible." "We have," Nora agreed. "We have been very blessed." As they stood there, Nora thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. All the challenges they had faced, all the joys they had experienced, all the love they had shared. It had been a good life, a life worth living. The years continued to pass, measured now in grandchildren's birthdays and school graduations, in the changing seasons and the reliable rhythm of their days together. Xavier's health began to decline in his early 60s, his heart not as strong as it once was. Nora cared for him with the same dedication she had shown that first day, though now it was born of decades of love rather than duty and compassion for a stranger. On a quiet afternoon in the fall of 1918, Xavier suffered a heart attack while sitting in his favorite chair on the porch. Nora was with him, of course, as she had been for 40 years. Their children and grandchildren gathered, and for 3 days Xavier drifted in and out of consciousness. But he always smiled when he saw Nora, and he always squeezed her hand to let her know he was still there. On the 4th day, with Nora holding his hand and their children surrounding them, Xavier opened his eyes one last time. He looked at his wife with all the love that had sustained them through 4 decades. "You gave me a reason to live," he whispered, just as he had all those years ago. "And you made every day worth living. Thank you, Nora. Thank you for everything." "I love you," Nora said through her tears. "I have loved you since that first day, and I will love you until my last day." "I know," Xavier said. "I have always known." He looked around at his children and grandchildren. "Take care of your mother. She is the strongest, bravest person I have ever known." And then, peacefully, surrounded by the family he had never thought he would have, Xavier Nolan closed his eyes for the last time. The funeral was held on a beautiful autumn day, with the Oklahoma sky clear and blue. It seemed like half of Tulsa turned out to say goodbye to the man who had served their town with honor for so many years. Nora stood strong through it all, supported by her children, grateful that Xavier had not suffered long, grateful for every single day they had been given together. In the weeks and months that followed, Nora found herself both heartbroken and grateful. Heartbroken because the man she had loved for 40 years was gone, because she would never again hear his voice or feel his hand in hers. But grateful, too, for all they had shared, for the life they had built, for the love that had sustained them through everything. She continued her work at the clinic, finding solace in helping others. Her children worried about her, but she assured them she was all right. She had her work, her family, her memories. She had been blessed with a great love, and that was more than many people ever got. Nora lived for another 12 years, remaining active and engaged with her community until the end. She saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own. She saw Tulsa continue to grow and change. She saw the world transform in ways she could never have imagined when she was that young woman traveling west in a wagon train. On a spring evening in 1930, Nora passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. She was buried next to Xavier, their headstones simple but bearing inscriptions that told their story. His read, Xavier Nolan, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he lived with honor. Hers read, Nora Sullivan Nolan, beloved wife, mother, and healer, she lived with compassion. Their children gathered for the funeral, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, 3 generations of the family that Xavier and Nora had created. As they stood around the grave, James, now in his 50s and looking remarkably like his father, told the story of how his parents had met. It was a story they had all heard many times, but it never got old. My father used to say that my mother saved his life, James said. And that was true, she did. But my mother always said that they saved each other. They were both lost souls who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. They taught us what it means to truly love someone, to commit to them through good times and bad, to build a life based on respect and partnership and genuine affection. The world is better because they were in it, and we are all better for having been loved by them. As the family said their final goodbyes and slowly dispersed, Claire stayed behind for a moment. She placed a hand on each headstone, remembering her parents, the love they had shared, the example they had set. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me what love should look like. Thank you for building a family. Thank you for everything." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of spring flowers and the promise of new life. And if Claire listened carefully, she could almost hear her father's voice saying the words he had said so many times. "She gave me a reason to live." And her mother's response, "We gave it to each other. We saved each other." It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, forged through hardship and challenge, and lasting beyond even death itself. 2 people who had found each other when they needed it most and built a legacy that would carry on through generations. It was a story of survival and love, of healing and hope, of 2 broken people who became whole together. And it all started with a wounded cowboy and a brave woman who refused to let him die. In a canyon in Oklahoma Territory in the summer of 1878, when the West was still wild and anything seemed possible. Their story lived on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passed down through the generations as a reminder of what real love looked like. It inspired marriages and gave hope to the lonely, and showed people that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best. Years later, when Claire was an old woman herself, she wrote down her parents' story in detail, preserving it for future generations. She wanted her own grandchildren to know about the remarkable people their great-grandparents had been. She wanted them to understand that love was not just about grand gestures and romantic moments, though there had been plenty of those. It was about the daily choice to show up for each other, to support each other, to build a life together brick by brick and day by day. The book she wrote was never published, but it was treasured by the family. Each generation read it and marveled at the story of Xavier and Nora, at how they had met and fallen in love and built something that lasted. It became a touchstone, a reminder of where they came from and what was possible when two people truly committed to each other. In the end, that was Xavier and Nora's greatest legacy. Not the clinic Nora had built or the criminals Xavier had brought to justice, though those things mattered. Their greatest legacy was the love they had shared and the family they had created. They had taken the worst that life could throw at them and transformed it into something beautiful. They had found each other when they both needed someone most, and they had held on tight, building a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. In a canyon in Oklahoma, on a brutal summer day in 1878, a wounded cowboy lay dying and a brave woman chose to save him. That single choice, that moment of compassion and courage, rippled out through time, affecting lives that had not even been born yet. It created a family and a legacy and a love story that would be remembered long after the Wild West faded into history. Xavier Nolan had been right when he whispered those words to Nora Sullivan. "You gave me a reason to live." But Nora had been right too when she replied that they had saved each other. That was the real truth of their story. Not that one saved the other, but that they had both been lost and found each other, and chose to build something together that was greater than either of them alone. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of danger and romance and adventure. But it was also a deeply human story, about two people finding connection and meaning in each other. It was about healing, both physical and emotional. It was about taking the broken pieces of two lives and fitting them together to create something whole and beautiful and lasting. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Xavier and Nora were together again, holding hands as they always had, grateful for the journey they had shared and the love that had sustained them through everything. They had lived well, loved well, and left behind a legacy that would endure. What more could anyone ask for? Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived and a love well earned. From that desperate day in the canyon to their final moments decades later, they had chosen each other every single day. And that, in the end, was what made their story so special. Not the drama of how they met, though that was remarkable, but the daily choice to love each other, to honor their commitment, to build a life together one day at a time. The Wild West faded into memory. Tulsa grew from a frontier town into a modern city. The world changed beyond recognition. But the love between Xavier Nolan and Nora Sullivan Nolan remained constant, a testament to the power of human connection and the resilience of the human heart. They had both been given a reason to live, and they had made the most of every moment they were given together. And that was how their story ended, not with sadness, but with gratitude for a life shared and love that lasted beyond death itself. It was a happy ending, hard-won and well-deserved, the kind of ending that reminds us all that love is worth fighting for, that connection is what gives life meaning, and that sometimes the worst moments can lead us to the very best.